I'm going to review Lesson 1 and then give an overview of Lesson 2 in this second week. Communications model, which we go over thoroughly in GRC 101, was reviewed, and we're going to rely upon your understanding of this, and particularly note in the lower left-hand corner that pathway there that's orange, the production workflow for the designer. That's the part we're emphasizing in this class, specifically in creating the vehicle, the layout, and the typography in putting together your message. And that's the vehicle, the format. So part of the question we're supposed to answer the first four things that a designer needs to know how to do is built right into this model here, and you should study it and understand it completely before moving on. Now, we defined layout, and that basically is graphics type and other devices that they're arranged in a certain way that forms a unified presentation. Everything looks like it's in place. We also defined what typography was, and it's just basically keystrokes that are formatted, and then those letter forms and other type characters are further manipulated to convey both visual and verbal information, mostly verbal information, of course, which is the bulk of any message. We got into thumbnailing. The first assignment involved you creating thumbnails, little tiny sketches that should represent as much detail as necessary, including the major graphic elements sketched in so you can clearly see what they're about, and the major type elements, the headline and other large headings, where you can actually read what has been lettered in. This will give the viewer a pretty good idea of the elements and how they pull together for the message. We define what data is. It's just meaningless reference material is all it is. And it does represent a lot of different things, but until it's given some meaning, it really is just data. Once it's given some meaning, then it is considered information. Very similar to the lady in the red dress in the movie Matrix. The operator could see all of the classical, everyone understands that graphic. You've got the falling characters on the green screen, and he looks at that and he sees the picture. And to us it's just data, but to him it has some sort of meaning. And there's three kinds of meaning, which we'll be talking about in this course. The audio meaning is not going to be as important to us, the meaning in sounds, although we can represent sounds visually and verbally in our layout. We talked about those three elements I mentioned earlier when we defined what layout was. Graphic elements is any kind of visual information that's represented by some sort of a graphic. Type elements are those things that carry all the type, and we talked about different names for the graphic and type elements, and we were to practice naming them in assignment 1. It carries not only verbal information, which the type represents, but also visual information through the use of color and an intermingling of graphics and how you apply typefaces and other types of formatting to them. And then lastly is devices. Devices do not have any information that it carries at all. They're just there for organizing and structuring and directing your attention. If a device is distractive, we'll go back here into the communications model, and what we don't have in here is right here normally is a little representation of noise, anything that is a hurdle or a barrier, something that delays or curtails or completely prevents the message from getting through. And a lot of times those kinds of problems are distractions that the designer puts in. And a lot of times we see these kind of devices just thrown in there. Sometimes little tiny graphics thrown into the layout to fill up space, and they contribute nothing to the unity of the layout or the message, and they're distracting. So they are to be used carefully. Now, lesson 2 is what we're going over in the second week. And we talked about these pre-designed decisions that are to be made by the designer before he even begins to design anything, before he even starts to do the sketches of the thumbnails. And these are things that you should understand. And if you don't understand them thoroughly, don't get started, with one exception, and that's number 4, okay? But if you don't understand the message, what you're trying to convey, then don't begin until you do. You need to do enough research and to thoroughly develop your idea and understanding what you want to say. And if you don't know who the audience is, how the heck are you going to choose the right kind of type or colors or graphics that will reach them, that will get their attention and convey the information you want? So if you don't understand 1 and 2, don't even start. Format, a brochure, a magazine page layout, a poster, a web page. If you don't know and understand the pros and the cons and the advantages and the disadvantages, the limitations and the strengths of your format, how it's going to be used, the venue. Brochure is used way differently than a poster. If you don't really understand that, how to best use that, then don't begin until you do. And then lastly, if you can't design because you don't understand design principles, how are you going to begin professionally designing a message? Well, the problem is this class teaches that. That's the last part here. So you are learning how to do that so that when you proceed, you'll have enough understanding that you'll be able to assemble the message to the right audience using the format with the content and the graphics and type and the devices to structure that presentation, that vehicle, in a way that's understood. Now, this design process begins with research and ideation. Sometimes one begins before the other. They're done simultaneously, back and forth. The ideation stage, where you're putting together ideas for the packaging, putting together the format of the message, is very important. And for every project, you're going to be doing thumbnails. Now, you want to gather together your assets or create them. Most of the time in this class, you're just going to be gathering them together. If you have some Photoshop and Illustrator skills, which you therefore can create or edit graphics that you find, that's fine. But once you have all the research, you know what your message is, your ideation is completely done as to what that is and how you're going to be presenting it, on your layouts, and you choose them, and then you start placing them and putting it together. And the following layout principles that we're going to be discussing in this class, following typographic principles that we're going to be discussing in this class, you begin the production. Now, we're mentioning layout grids in this week's material. That's one way to structure the placement of your elements on the page so that they seem unified. Unity is the ultimate goal for you as a layout designer. The purpose of layout is to, in a unified way, present all the pieces of the message. Nothing is out of place. Everything contributes to the whole. There is no distraction. And that's what is the basis of a lot of the critiques that we're going through in this class. Now, style, we'll talk more about it, but that is a consistent use of formatting and presentation. And if you have every page with this, say in a magazine, a multi-page document, or a series of posters, and you want to be consistency from layout to layout to have a certain style, then grids can help do that. Column formats, something you have to understand. You divide up your layout in slices, and each slice is an equal width, and that width is considered a column width. So the number of equal slices, the number of columns that make up the layout, that is the column format. So the higher the number, 4 columns, has more columns than 3-column format, and the 4-column format, the columns are narrower. So the more columns you have in your format, the narrower are the columns, and the more variety that you can create. Also discussed a little bit in measuring type. You need to get this under your belt right away, because if you don't understand pica and point and how they relate to each other, what the sizing is, and how to use a type gauge to measure that, you're going to be out a little bit on that. Now, this covers the material, and if this is all you listen to, at least you have an outline and understanding. Study the materials that I posted and seek to apply these in the assignments that we're working with.